Hi, everyone. It's Erin with Hail Varsity. I am joined by Greg, recruiting extraordinaire, also of Hail Varsity, and we are back to answer another question of yours, specifically on recruiting, because it is the recruiting question of the week video. Greg, before we hop into this, how are you?
I am well. It feels weird not having like all of the things happening at once, like coming out of signing day week and then jumping into, I don't want to say the slower time, but I guess it's a slower time from that is a little jarring, but good otherwise.
It's good to take a little bit of a breather because spring football is going to be here before we know it. It's earlier than I'd say Nebraska fans are used to. Many schools start early in the spring semester, but Nebraska is starting earlier than I would say in the last several years I'm accustomed to. So for you, having been just so busy with recruiting, you got to take a little bit of a break because once spring football hits, you're going to start having those visits and everything else that right back into the thick of it. Recruiting doesn't sleep. It never ends.
No, it really doesn't, which makes it very fun, but also it never ends.
It doesn't. And because it never ends, this is actually very fitting. So I know this is kind of one of those questions where you maybe don't always want to tackle it so early in the year, but we're going to. So Jake Maris on Twitter asked you, Greg, for your way too early predictions for the 2023 class rankings. So that's where we're at. We're already now into 2023, which means we'll be talking about 2024, 2025, all of it way too soon. But looking just at 2023 class rankings, what would be your early class predictions early prediction for this class?
So the short answer of that of my early prediction is that I think that Nebraska could be a top 20 recruiting class for the class of 23. Okay. Or 2023. I keep shortening to 20 or to 23 because it just makes more sense in my head. Anyway, there's a few factors for that, though. I think first and foremost, Nebraska's new coaches, the people that have now come onto the staff, I think breathe a lot of life and energy into Nebraska's recruiting operation. I think that in three of them in particular, Mickey Joseph, Bill Bush, and Brian Applewhite, all come from situations to varying degrees where the level of effort that needed to be put in on the recruiting trail and the stuff that they were used to at their previous schools was just different than not just Nebraska, but a lot of places, right? And so they're used to doing things a certain way. And I think that that will have a real big benefit for Nebraska, both obviously landing players and getting them interested, but also just what other coaches on the Nebraska staff have to raise their level to. I think that that's a real hidden kind of X factor in all of this. The other thing that I think could lead to Nebraska having a big bounce back year is that the in-state recruiting and the 500-mile radius are both really, really good. So you already have Nebraska with 2 in-state commitments for the 23 class, and then you have 3 more players that already have offers from Nebraska, and all of them you would feel pretty good about maybe ending up at Nebraska: Maverick Noonan, Sam Sledge, and Malachi Coleman. Then you go to the border states. If you just look at Iowa, Colorado, Kansas, and Missouri, Nebraska has really hit those states hard, particularly in the January contact period, to make contact with those guys, to get them on campus for junior days. And the talent warrants that. Like, it's really, really good. So I think that Nebraska could end up having 60 to 70% of their recruiting class for 23 end up being from Nebraska and those border states. And the talent merits that. So that would be a huge benefit for them.
I mean, I think a lot of Nebraska fans would love to see a higher concentration of in-state players or very close to in-state.
Right.
We know that people don't want to see any of those in-state players leave. The thing has always been you can't get everyone, of course. It's
Right.
just not possible. They're not always going to match your needs, what the team is looking for. But I think what people have really been focused on is the fact that Nebraska has sort of let some of these big targets get away. And it sounds like maybe that could change. Now, I will say what's really difficult with these way too early recruiting rankings is we're speaking about them without having any idea what's going to happen on the field. As everyone jokes, it's not just Nebraska, but everyone wins the offseason. The offseason is good to a lot of people, a lot of programs. But once you get into the season, that really determines what ends up happening with your recruiting class. So based on the people that Nebraska is offering and interested in right now, you can make a case that, hey, it could look like a top 20 class, and a lot of these players could come from this area. But if Nebraska, say, starts, I don't even want to give I don't even want to make a prediction, but based on what Nebraska potentially starts its record at, that could have we know it could have a very quick adverse effect on the recruiting rankings of this class, because players might start looking elsewhere. They may no longer be as interested. And so that's going to be something to really keep an eye on, is how Nebraska performs. It really does feel like, and we're not the first to say this, but it really does feel like a make or break situation for Scott Frost of what can he do not only for this team that he currently has, but how that team performs is ultimately going to, one, potentially dictate his future with Nebraska, but then what this recruiting class looks like, which sounds really dramatic. Somebody is going to be in the comments saying that that's way too dramatic. I'm just saying, with anything, there are always other factors that ultimately play a role in what ends up happening with a class.
Yes and no. The interesting thing,
don't disagree with me. I'm just
kidding. No, actually, first of all, your point is good. That is correct. But the interesting thing about like it being dramatic is what I was going to say, is that it's not really, right? Like, based on what Scott Frost's contract situation is currently, right, and based on kind of the trajectory of the program, I think that it's valid to go there and to say that it's a make or break time. And I think that it's even more so like the beginning of Nebraska season. Like, and I don't even put this into the universe for like Nebraska fans that are going to yell at me for this, but like if Nebraska goes to Dublin and lays an egg and loses to Northwestern, like the same way that shaped the season and the narrative around and the feelings around Nebraska last year with losing that opening game to Illinois, it will be worse if it happens again this year in Dublin to Northwestern. So yes, it's very important. And that is the kind of the key in all of this. Like, the additional effort from Nebraska assistants and their connections and, you know, the 500-mile radius and the in-state, like all of that stuff is great. But if Nebraska is not good on the field or not better on the field, then it's all for naught. Like that's going to be a huge component once we get to the season.
And that's really what makes predicting any kind of future of any recruiting class difficult, because you have to kind of factor in all of these other pieces. And for people who are going, why are you being so dramatic about Nebraska? Some people will agree with it, some people won't. That is just the blessing of the curse of the current situation in Nebraska. But let me offer this one piece of it. Think of it this way too. What just happened at Michigan? Michigan coach Jim Harbaugh flew to Minnesota for an interview with the Vikings on signing day, ultimately is returning to Michigan for the 2022 season. But aside from what happens on the field, that is now something that other programs are going to be able to use against Michigan in recruiting. So when we talk about what will Michigan's recruiting class looks like a year from now, when we're reflecting back on it, who knows what the effects of this one decision that Jim Harbaugh made to go take that interview, do so on signing day, might ultimately mean to this. So when we talk about these outside factors, and it's not even an outside factor, it's literally like what happens in a game and what happens with the team and what the coach is doing, etc. We saw that when Frost made the decision to fire coaches and hire new coaches, that changed the landscape of this class. There are always going to be things that make it difficult to predict too early, because you just don't know. So like I said, that's any given Saturday, using the any given Sunday, anything can happen. But at the same time, anything can happen. So you kind of take your best guess. But until we start to see it all play out, we won't really probably have a real true understanding of what this looks like, because Nebraska's class for 2022 ended up looking a lot better than I think we all thought it was going to in December. And a lot of that had to do with the MVP, Mickey Joseph.
Yes, it did. And Bill Bush, and then Brian Applewhite brought in a running back as well. And then the myriad of transfers that ended up coming in. It looked totally different than what you thought it was going to. Or think back to when the game ended against Iowa. If I had told you all of the different additions that Nebraska would land 2 quarterbacks, that they would get LSU transfers and all of this, like you would not have believed me. And so things turned quickly, and that is the kind of also the nature of recruiting. This thing can change in a hurry to both the good or the bad. And so you just have to let it play out a little bit for us to see. But I think the potential is there for Nebraska to do really well in 2023 on the recruiting trail. They just need some other things to come together.
Exactly. Well, it was a great question, Jake. And if you want more on this particular topic, be sure to head to the recruiting notebook tonight, 6 p.m. Central at hailvarsity.com. Greg will dive further into it, but he does that on a number of topics 5 days a week, Sunday through Thursday, 6 p.m. Central, hailvarsity.com. That recruiting notebook is really your spot to know what is going on in the world of recruiting, specifically focused on Nebraska. But sometimes Greg steps out of just the Nebraska football scope. For instance, his most recent recruiting notebook looked at the Nebraska high school football landscape and where players from across the state ended up signing on signing day. So depending on your interest in recruiting, whether it's just very hyper, focused locally, or you want a bigger picture, Greg has you covered in the recruiting notebook. So be sure to check that out. Again, Mondays, this is a deeper dive on this particular topic. So go check that out. Greg, as always, we appreciate you for your time and your knowledge. We will be back with more next week. I hope you get to enjoy a little bit of this break before spring football begins.
Thank you. So do I.